At UMC, access to your healthcare is only a call away. Dial 74-NURSE for free, instant medical advice from experienced and trusted UMC nurses. 24 hours a day. Learn more at umchealthsystem.com.
Welcome in, everyone, to RedRaiders.com. I'm Zach along with Don Williams, and that means it is time for Don versus Twitter. Every week, Don takes a look at his followers' Twitter questions and does his best to answer them. And Don, a little less this week, but also it was a quick turnaround week, and last week was an off week, but still, they managed to send you a pretty good little amount of questions here.
That's right. I think we got a good Don versus Twitter show all ready to go. Some good questions, multiple topics. That's what we like.
Let's roll into it, Don. And as you informed me earlier, this first one is from a former Texas Tech football player, Merv Skurlark. He says, at AJ Don Williams, what is Brewer's status?
Michael Brewer's status this week, I'd say questionable. He's on the field for practice, or he is on the field. He's doing some things on the field. Cliff Kingsbury says he's not fully cleared yet. I would say the odds of seeing him Saturday are slim. You might see him a tiny bit if you see him at all. Main reason why I think is because he's not had. He's been out for
a long time.
Very long time. Yeah,
you're talking the first week of camp, roughly.
Yeah. So you're talking nearly 2 months. And Cliff Kingsbury said a while back that he thought it would take an extended period of time before he is really ready to face Big 12 defenses.
And if you take signs as indications of stuff, you saw Michael on Monday at the press conference walking around, smile on his face, looked extremely happy, a lot different, persona than what we'd seen earlier in the fall camp.
Yeah, I will say this: his body language the last week or so is much better than it was for those first 3 weeks or so of football practice when he did not look happy, and now he looks like the old Michael Brewer with the bounce back in the step.
So take that for what you will. Don, let's continue on with Robert Jones right here, at AJ Don Williams. What are the odds Brewer is the starter by West Virginia?
That would be Game 7. Tech's going into Game 5 this week. I'd say I might go as high as 50-50.
There you go.
That Michael Brewer could be starter by the West Virginia game. That'd give him a couple of weeks to kind of work back into form, get back on the same page with some of his receivers, get his timing down. 50-50 maybe by West Virginia.
So good odds from Don Williams on that one. Robert Powell with this one, Don. How much does Cliff talk to other coaches during the off weeks? Examples such as Leach, Belichick, Peyton, any of those people?
I didn't ask Cliff that specifically. I'm not sure that he did, though, because even though it's an off week for fans and for more kind of sort of an off week for the team, just because you don't have a game on Saturday, I don't think the coaches really view it that way because they were really pushing hard to get out on the road and look at and evaluate recruits, and also had a few practices last week as well. So I'm not sure that if Cliff talked to any coaches, maybe more likely probably text messages even than telephone conversations.
Yeah, I think the man is a huge fan of text messaging. You see him doing it quite a bit around the facility. Don, Robert Powell with another one for you here, and he's going to go into that discussion many people have. SEC may get number 8 this year. He's referring to a national title, of course. But then it's over. Big 12, Pac-12 will all have better young quarterbacks with lots of eligibility left. Your thoughts on Mr. Powell's prediction?
Well, that streak has to end sometime. But the thing about it, that may be true, Robert, about the young quarterbacks or better young quarterbacks in a couple other leagues than the SEC. But to me, it's still all about games are won in the trenches, and as long as the SEC continues to get great offensive linemen, great defensive linemen, which they seem to grow in abundance in that part of the country, then the best of those teams is still going to be really tough to beat come January and December.
The only thing going in Mr. Powell's favor here is there will be a playoff next year after his predicted number 8 happens this season.
Yeah, so they'd have to. So the SEC teams would have to win
a
couple of postseason games.
So when there's 3 SEC teams and one other conference, maybe
that helps their odds.
Maybe not quite that drastic, but it could happen. Don Angel Rodriguez has one for you here. With the success of the Texas Tech defense, will we be looking for yet another defensive coordinator next year?
I think the implication there is that Matt Wallerstedt has coached at the Texas Tech defense so good that he might be hired away by some other university. I'm not sure I'll go that far yet. It's only 4 games into the season, and Tech's really only faced one really good opponent, I would say, in TCU. SMU kind of okay, not a bad team, not a great team. So I think it is very positive, very encouraging, the signs that you've seen with what Matt Wallerstedt has done with the Texas Tech defense so far. You like the aggression, you like the blitz packages, you like the disguising coverages, and all those different games that they're playing to keep offensive linemen and quarterbacks confused. However, one thing about Coach Wallerstedt, there was a perception when he was coming from Texas A&M to Texas Tech that it was about money, and he said that was totally false. He said it was all the whole thing with him, and the reason why it took him a couple of weeks to decide to take the Texas Tech job was because his mom lived down in College Station and had been down there less than a year. Actually, she actually lived down there before he got the Texas A&M job. And he was very concerned about uprooting her again with another move. And I think the same thing could very well come into play if Texas Tech continues to have the success this season that it has had so far. I mean, if there are other programs that actually want to talk to him, I think he, for family reasons, might be reluctant to uproot again so quickly.
Head coaching job, kind of all bets are off when you get that call. But
another
coordinator job, probably going to be a tough sell to get Matt Wallerstedt out of here.
Right. If you're talking only a lateral move to another program.
All right, Don, our last question here. And I will point out this question did come in through what we consider illegal means. It wasn't through the Twitter format, but because this guy is such a VIP with us, we're going to allow it to get on the show. And, of course, we're referring to our good friend David Collier over at the KMAC studios. So since David's a bigwig, we went ahead and let it slide this week to get this question in for you, Don. David Collier says, where does the 2001 Kansas loss rank in the last 20 years of Tech football?
And I think got me to thinking. That's a good question, David. I'm not sure I would put it in the top 5. I mean, that Kansas team beat Texas Tech 34-31 double overtime at Jones Stadium. Cliff Kingsbury was asked this week.
By you?
No, it was not by me. It was somebody else. I forget who exactly, but he was asked this week about that, being the quarterback of that team that lost 34-31 to Kansas. I would point out that Cliff got hurt in that game, so he was a starter, but he came out in the fourth quarter because he hurt his thumb. B.J. Simmons was actually in for that double overtime when Tech lost 34-31. That Kansas team then went on to lose 6 games in a row after that and finished 3-8. So it was not a good loss, but I wouldn't put it among Tech's worst losses over the last 20 years, mainly because that was a Tech team that was in year 2 under Mike Leach and hadn't really taken off yet. So I wouldn't classify it as quite a bad loss. I went back through the history books, and to me there are kind of 6 losses that stick out as the worst losses. Now, preface this by saying Tech has been destroyed by some really good teams at Oklahoma, against the Longhorns. I don't include those because those were outstanding those are outstanding opponents that you were facing. So to me, the losses that stick out, the worst loss to me the last 20 years, 2006 Colorado game.
Oh boy.
The Buffs were.
I wasn't here yet, and I hear about that one on about a weekly basis through old school Tech fans.
They went into the game 0-6. They had a 10-game losing streak dating to the previous season, and they beat the Red Raiders 30-6.
That sounds familiar, Don.
I mean,
doesn't KU have a pretty good losing streak going in the Big 12 coming into this weekend?
Yeah, they've lost 19 Big 12 games.
Not foreshadowing, I'm just saying.
I mean, not only did Colorado upset Tech that day, but they destroyed them. I mean, it was a blowout from the beginning. So that was one of my worst losses in the top 5. Here's another one: 2005 Oklahoma State game. Texas Tech team that's 8-1 against an Oklahoma State team that had lost 5 games in a row. Was not a good OSU team. What it was the senior day for those Cowboys, and they played their butts off and beat Tech 24-17. It was a great defensive game for Oklahoma State that day, and that game kept Texas Tech from getting double-digit wins that year. That one, you had the 2003 Missouri game, 62-31 loss. It was not a bad Missouri team, but it was one of the worst days in defensive Tech setback college football defensive play. About 30 years that day. I remember that one because Mike Leach comes out of the locker room, gives a 40-second angry soundbite, spins on his heel, back into the locker room. That was your post game. Work with that, David. He probably remembers. Couple others. The 2011, we'll go 2011, a dual entry here. Packed to Jones to see Iowa State beat Tech 41-7.
That was bad.
And then Oklahoma State 66-6. in which Tech fans are running over each other to get out of the stadium before halftime. That's a dual entry. And then 1999 North Texas game. North Texas was the bane of Spike Dykes' existence, and the loss to North Texas 21-14 was kind of the beginning of Spike's exit that year.
Don,
thanks, David, for bringing back all those good memories.
And thank you, David, for evoking such a long response out of him. Your knowledge is unbelievable, and this list is a pretty amazing list.
I think I was personally I covered every one of those games in person. So
that right there is an amazing fact in its own that you were there for every single game. Well, Don, it was a shorter list this week, but some good ones, and that was a real interesting point there at the end. Thanks to David for texting that into us, and thanks to everyone else for actually using Twitter to submit their questions. That's going to wrap up this episode of Don versus Twitter. We have a lot more coverage coming up this week on Lubbock Online and RedRaiders.com. Of course, our UMC AJ Media pregame show, and trust me, this week you will not want to miss this episode. We'll also have our topics conversation with Krista Pirtle before we depart for Don's favorite city in America, Lawrence, Kansas.
There's a lot of hippies in Lawrence.
Yes, there are. And we'll be up there Friday with full coverage. Until that time, we'll see you